It was a quiet Tuesday evening in the small town of Crestwood. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the streets. Tasha Williams, a 32-year-old nurse and mother of two, was finishing up her shift at the local hospital. She stopped by a convenience store on her way home to grab some groceries for dinner. Just another ordinary day in her busy life. Tasha wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd. She was kind, hardworking, and always thinking about others before herself. Her kids often joked that she never sat still because there was always someone or something needing her attention. That evening, though, all she wanted was to get home, cook a quick meal, and spend some time with her family. As she walked out of the store carrying her bags, she didn't notice anything unusual around her. But then, out of nowhere, flashing, red and blue lights lit up the parking lot. A police car pulled up behind her vehicle, its siren blaring briefly before cutting off. Tasha froze for a moment, confused. Had she done something wrong? She carefully placed her grocery bags inside her trunk and turned toward the officer approaching her. It was Officer Greg Harris, a middle-aged man with a stern expression etched onto his face. He wore his uniform like armor, exuding authority. As he stepped closer, without so much as a greeting, he accused her of rolling through a stop sign a few blocks away. Tasha blinked in disbelief. "A stop sign?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't run any stop sign, officer." Harris crossed his arms, his tone clipped. "You're telling me I'm lying?" "No," Tasha replied, trying to keep her cool. "But I know I came to a full stop. If you have proof, show it to me." What happened next shocked everyone nearby, and would soon shock an entire nation. Instead of showing patience or professionalism, Officer Harris grew visibly irritated. His jaw tightened and his body language shifted from authoritative to aggressive. When Tasha continued to question him, asking if he had dashcam footage to back up his claim, things spiraled out of control. "You think you can talk back to me?" Harris snapped, stepping even closer. Before Tasha could respond, he grabbed her arm roughly and shoved her against her car. The sound of her body hitting the metal echoed through the parking lot. Her groceries spilled onto the ground, apples rolling across the pavement like forgotten toys. People nearby gasped, unsure of what they were witnessing. Was this really happening? One bystander quickly pulled out their phone and started recording. Through shaky footage, the world saw how Harris pinned Tasha against her car, yelling insults while she tried to steady herself. His words cut deep, laced with prejudice and anger. Though muffled by the chaos, those words carried weight, words no one should ever hear directed at them. Tasha struggled to catch her breath, pain radiating through her side where she'd been pushed. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from physical pain, but from sheer disbelief. How could this be happening? All she had done was ask for evidence. Why was this man treating her like a criminal? The commotion drew more attention. Customers leaving the store paused, unsure whether to intervene. Some whispered nervously among themselves, afraid of escalating the situation further. Others simply watched, horrified as the scene unfolded before them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Harris let go of Tasha and stepped back. He muttered something under his breath and returned to his patrol car without issuing a ticket or explaining himself. Just like that, he drove off, leaving Tasha standing alone in the parking lot, trembling and humiliated. For a few moments, everything seemed eerily silent. Then, slowly, people began to approach her. Someone helped pick up her scattered groceries, handing her bruised fruits and crushed chips. Another person offered her a tissue, noticing the tears streaming down her cheeks. Despite the kindness of strangers, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. This wasn't just about her, it was about every person who looked like her, who might find themselves in a similar situation someday. Little did Tasha know, the video captured by the bystander would spread like wildfire. Within hours, millions of people would see her story, sparking outrage and calls for justice. But for now, she stood there in the dimly lit parking lot, clutching her keys tightly, wondering how such a routine errand could turn into a nightmare. Her mind raced with questions. What comes next? Would anyone believe her side of the story? And most importantly, how could she make sure this never happened to someone else again? The momentum around Tasha's story kept growing, but with it came challenges she hadn't anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and while the protests outside the police station continued to draw crowds, Tasha found herself wrestling with tough decisions. Everyone had an opinion about what she should do next. Some urged her to press criminal charges against Officer Harris. Others suggested she sue the department, and still more advised her to stay quiet and let things calm down. But none of those options felt quite right to her. One evening, after a long day of interviews and phone calls, Tasha sat at her kitchen table staring at a blank notebook page. She'd been jotting down thoughts, trying to make sense of everything, swirling in her mind. The weight of expectations from supporters, critics, even herself was almost suffocating. What did justice really look like? Was it enough to punish one officer, or was there something bigger at stake here? Her phone buzzed constantly on the table beside her. Notifications poured in from social media, emails, texts. People were watching, waiting for her next move. It felt like the entire town, and maybe the whole country, was holding its breath, ready to see how this chapter would unfold. For a moment, Tasha closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She needed clarity, not chaos. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just about revenge or retribution. Yes, she wanted accountability for what happened to her, but more importantly, she wanted to stop this kind of thing from happening again, to anyone. Punishing one person wouldn't fix the deeper problems lurking within the system. Real change required action that went beyond individual blame. With newfound resolve, Tasha drafted a statement. Early the next morning, she called a press conference outside the community center where she often volunteered. Reporters gathered quickly, cameras rolling as Tasha stepped up to the microphone. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the mic to her height, but her voice was steady when she began to speak. First, I want to thank everyone who has stood by me during this difficult time, she started, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. Your support means more than I can put into words. But today I need to share something important. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I've decided not to pursue criminal charges against the officer involved in my case. This decision wasn't easy, but I believe focusing on systemic reform is the best way forward. For me, for my community, and for future generations. Holding one person accountable won't solve the larger issues we're facing. We need policies that protect everyone equally, regardless of their race, gender, or background. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Some people nodded in agreement while others looked skeptical. A reporter shouted from the back, "Doesn't this let him off the hook?" Tasha held up a hand to silence the room. "No," she said firmly. "Not pursuing criminal charges doesn't mean letting him off the hook. There will still be consequences for his actions. But my focus is on creating lasting change. Change that addresses why situations like mine happen in the first place." Went on to explain her plan. Filing a lawsuit not only against Officer Harris personally, but also against the entire police department. The goal was to expose decades of discriminatory practices and demand meaningful reforms. Body cameras, better training, independent oversight boards, all these ideas became central to her vision for a safer, fairer community. When the press conference ended, reactions were mixed. Supporters praised Tasha's courage and foresight, calling her approach bold and necessary. Critics accused her of being naive or soft, saying she should have pushed harder for immediate punishment. Online debates raged with hashtags like #reform over retribution, trending alongside heated arguments. Despite the backlash, Tasha stayed focused. She teamed up with civil rights lawyers and advocacy groups to build her case. Together they combed through years of records, uncovering patterns of misconduct and bias within the department. Anonymous tips poured in from current and former officers, detailing incidents of racial profiling, cover-ups, and inadequate accountability measures. Each piece of evidence strengthened her argument and fueled public outrage. As the legal battle unfolded, Tasha threw herself into activism. She attended city council meetings, spoke at rallies, and met with local leaders to discuss policy changes. Her message was simple yet powerful. True justice isn't about punishing individuals. It's about fixing broken systems so no one else has to endure what she did. But the fight took its toll. Late nights spent strategizing left her exhausted, and balancing activism with work and parenting became increasingly difficult. Friends noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the weight she'd lost. Her kids sometimes complained that mommy was too busy to play, and guilt gnawed at her whenever she missed bedtime stories or soccer practice. Still, Tasha refused to give up. Every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Not just for herself, but for her children and countless others who deserved a brighter future. She imagined a world where no parent had to worry about their child being treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. That vision kept her going, even on the hardest days. One night after putting her kids to bed, Tasha sat alone on the couch flipping through old family photos. She smiled at pictures of her son's first birthday, her daughter's school plays, and lazy Sunday mornings spent baking pancakes together. These moments were precious, fleeting reminders of what truly mattered. No matter how tough things got, she told herself, protecting these moments for her family, and for families everywhere, was worth every sacrifice. By the time she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, Tasha felt a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't come overnight, but step by step, brick by brick, she was laying the foundation for a better tomorrow. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. She wasn't walking it alone. The lawsuit Tasha filed against the police department sent shockwaves through Crestwood. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a reckoning, one that forced the entire town to confront uncomfortable truths about its history and values. The discovery process revealed documents, records, and testimonies that painted a damning picture of systemic racism within the department. Patterns emerged, officers targeting minorities for minor infractions, internal investigations being swept under the rug, and training programs failing to address implicit bias. As evidence mounted, the cracks in the system became impossible to ignore. Federal investigators stepped in, launching their own probe into the department's practices. This added pressure made it clear that the issue wasn't isolated to Officer Harris or even Crestwood. It was part of a much larger, deeply entrenched problem across the country. For many residents, this realization was sobering. Some felt shame, others felt anger. But most agreed on one thing: something had to change. Meanwhile, Officer Harris's life unraveled. Once a figure of authority and respect, he now found himself ostracized by his colleagues and community alike. His wife left him, taking their children with her. Friends stopped returning his calls. Even his neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed him on the street. Publicly disgraced, Harris tried to defend himself, insisting he'd just been doing his job. But those words rang hollow in a town that had finally woken up to the harm caused by unchecked power. Still, resistance lingered. Not everyone welcomed Tasha's crusade for reform. Local politicians, fearful of losing support from powerful unions, pushed back against her proposals. Anonymous threats poured in, some directed at Tasha, others aimed at anyone supporting her cause. At night, she double-checked the locks on her doors and windows, her heart racing every time a car drove past her house. To protect herself and her family, she installed security cameras and hired private protection. Despite the fear, Tasha refused to let intimidation silence her. If anything, the threats only strengthened her resolve. She knew she was fighting for more than just herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been mistreated because of their race, gender, or background. And as the weeks went by, unexpected allies began stepping forward to join her fight. One such ally was a retired officer who had served in Crestwood decades earlier. He reached out to Tasha after seeing her speak at a rally, admitting he'd witnessed similar misconduct during his time on the force but had never spoken up. Now haunted by regret, he offered to testify about what he'd seen. His decision sparked a domino effect. Other former officers came forward too, sharing stories of corruption, cover-ups, and discriminatory behavior they'd either witnessed or been pressured to participate in. Their testimonies added fuel to the fire. With each new revelation, public outrage grew louder. Protesters filled the streets again, demanding accountability not just for Officer Harris, but for everyone complicit in maintaining a flawed system. The protests weren't just angry, they were organized. Community members held workshops to educate themselves about policing reform, drafted petitions, and lobbied local leaders to take action. What started as a single woman's fight had blossomed into a full-blown movement. But the weight of leadership took its toll on Tasha. Balancing activism with her responsibilities as a mother and nurse became increasingly difficult. Days blurred together as she juggled court appearances, strategy meetings, and media interviews, alongside long shifts at the hospital. Her kids noticed the changes. They saw how tired she looked, how often she skipped meals or fell asleep on the couch, still wearing her scrubs. One evening, her youngest asked, "Mommy, are you okay?" Tasha hugged her tightly, blinking back tears. "I'm okay, baby," she said softly. "I'm just working really hard to make things better for all of us." Even with the challenges, there were moments of triumph that kept her going. Like the day a group of high school students organized a march through downtown Crestwood, chanting slogans inspired by Tasha's words. Or the afternoon when a local business owner donated free meals to feed protesters camped outside the police station. These small acts of solidarity reminded her why she kept pushing forward, even when it felt like the world was stacked against her. Then came the moment she'd been waiting for, a breakthrough in the case. During a hearing, lawyers presented overwhelming evidence of systemic misconduct within the police department. Emails showed supervisors dismissing complaints of racial profiling. Internal memos revealed inadequate training protocols. Testimonies from whistleblowers confirmed widespread indifference to accountability. By the end of the session, even skeptics couldn't deny the scope of the problem. That night, Tasha sat alone in her living room, staring at the stack of papers, detailing everything uncovered during the investigation. She felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, sadness. The truth was out there now, undeniable and raw. But she also knew this was just the beginning. Exposing wrongdoing was one thing, fixing it was another. Her phone buzzed with messages from supporters congratulating her on the progress. One stood out. "You're changing lives," it read. "Thank you for standing strong." Tasha smiled faintly, saving the message to reread later. In moments of doubt, she'd need reminders like these to keep her grounded. By morning, she was back at work, both literally and figuratively. She met with civil rights organizations to draft policy recommendations, spoke at schools about the importance of speaking out against injustice, and continued advocating for reforms at city council meetings. Every step brought her closer to her goal, but the journey was far from over. As she stood on stage at a community event a few weeks later, addressing a crowd of hundreds, Tasha allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought about the quiet Tuesday evening that changed everything: the fear, the humiliation, the pain. She thought about the people who doubted her, criticized her, threatened her. And she thought about the countless strangers who rallied behind her, believing in a future where fairness outweighed prejudice. With a deep breath, she looked out at the sea of faces before her. "This isn't easy," she admitted, "and it won't happen overnight. But if we keep showing up, keep demanding better, we can build a world where no one has to live in fear because of who they are." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the auditorium like a promise. Change might be slow, but it was coming, and Tasha intended to see it through no matter how long it took. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final verdict. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras clicked incessantly, and murmurs filled the air. Tasha sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly together. She hadn't slept much the night before, her mind racing with possibilities. What if the judge ruled against her? What if all her efforts ended in disappointment? But deep down she knew that no matter the outcome, she had already sparked something bigger than herself. A movement that couldn't be silenced. When the judge finally delivered the ruling, it felt like time stood still. The police department was ordered to implement sweeping reforms: mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, stricter guidelines for use of force incidents, and comprehensive bias training programs. Officer Harris, meanwhile, was stripped of his badge permanently and sentenced to 6 months in jail for assault. It wasn't a life-changing punishment, but it sent a clear message: no one was above accountability. As the gavel came down, cheers erupted from the crowd. Strangers hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. For many, this moment represented more than just justice for Tasha. It symbolized hope for a future where fairness outweighed prejudice. Tasha stayed seated, letting the weight of everything sink in. Her chest tightened, not from sadness or fear, but from relief. Finally, after months of relentless struggle, there was closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, shoving microphones in her face. "How does it feel?" they asked. "What's next for you?" Tasha paused, collecting her thoughts before speaking. "Today isn't about me," she said, her voice steady but soft. "It's about every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of who they are. This is a step forward, but we still have work to do." Her words resonated far beyond Crestwood. News outlets across the country covered the story, praising Tasha as a symbol of resilience and courage. People shared her journey online, calling her an inspiration. Some even started petitions demanding similar reforms in their own communities. The ripple effect of her fight grew wider, touching lives she'd never meet. But for Tasha, the real impact was closer to home. Back in Crestwood, change began to take shape. Body cameras became standard equipment for officers, capturing interactions between law enforcement and residents. Independent oversight boards were formed, giving citizens a voice in holding police accountable. Training sessions focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity replaced outdated practices. Slowly, trust between the community and its officers started to rebuild. Not everyone embraced these changes immediately. Some officers grumbled about feeling micromanaged, while others worried the new policies would make their jobs harder. But over time, attitudes shifted. Many realized that transparency didn't weaken authority, it strengthened it. When officers started treating people with respect, they found that trust went both ways. Residents felt safer, and officers felt supported, creating a cycle of mutual understanding. Tasha continued to play a role in shaping this new reality. She founded an organization dedicated to empowering marginalized communities and advocating for systemic reform. Through workshops, mentorship programs, and public speaking engagements, she inspired others to speak out against injustice. Her message was simple yet powerful. Change begins when we refuse to stay silent. Traveling across the country, Tasha shared her story with anyone who would listen. In small towns and big cities alike, she met people eager to learn how they could create change in their own communities. At one event, a teenager approached her afterward, nervously clutching a notebook. "I want to help," he said, "but I don't know where to start." Tasha smiled warmly, encouraging him to begin by listening to his neighbors, his peers, and himself. "You don't need to have all the answers," she told him. "Just show up. That's how movements grow." Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Tasha returned to her nursing job, finding comfort in the familiar routines of caring for patients. Her kids adjusted too, proud of their mom, but grateful to have her attention again. They laughed together during family game nights, baked cookies on lazy Sundays, and spent weekends exploring parks and hiking trails. These moments reminded Tasha why she fought so hard: to ensure her children grew up in a world where fairness wasn't a privilege but a right. Still, the scars of the past lingered. Some nights Tasha woke up replaying the incident in her mind, the sound of her groceries hitting the pavement echoing in her ears. Other times she caught herself glancing at strangers' faces, wondering if they recognized her, or worse, judged her. But instead of letting those feelings consume her, she channeled them into action. Every setback became a lesson, every doubt a reason to push harder. Years passed, and Crestwood transformed. Once known as a town plagued by division, it became a model for progressive policing. Residents took pride in their community, hosting block parties and festivals that brought people together. Kids played freely in the streets, knowing they were safe. Officers walked beats alongside civilians, chatting casually and building relationships. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements and misunderstandings, but progress was undeniable. One evening, Tasha stood backstage at a national conference, waiting to deliver a keynote speech. Thousands of people filled the auditorium, their applause thunderous as she stepped onto the stage. The spotlight warmed her skin, but it was the sea of smiling faces that truly lit her up. She thought back to that quiet Tuesday evening years ago, the fear, the pain, the humiliation, and marveled at how far she'd come. "I didn't set out to be a hero," she began, her voice carrying through the room. "I just wanted to protect my family and my community. But along the way, I learned something important. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared." The audience erupted in applause, standing to honor the woman, who had turned tragedy into triumph. As Tasha looked out at the crowd, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the support she'd received, but for the opportunity to inspire others. She had started as a victim, but she ended as a leader. And though the road ahead would always hold challenges, Tasha knew she wasn't walking it alone. Together, she and countless others were building a brighter, fairer future. One step, one policy, one conversation at a time.